Her downstairs neighbor texted her that she was being too loud, but she wasn't even home. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She was out at a bar about 3.5 Cosmopolitans deep. Tipsy, maybe somewhat pickled, but not totally gone. She pulled her phone out of her pocket. As someone who lived alone, the complaint was both confusing and alarming. She had one new text from her downstairs neighbor, who rarely texted her and she barely knew. He said, "Could she please stop stomping around up there? It's very late." She sensed the aggression in his tone. One time she held a big party on a Wednesday night and actually received a noise complaint from her landlord, whom the downstairs neighbor had spilled the beans to. Since then, she was cautious to not be too noisy. She stepped lightly, kept her volume of things low, and never raised her voice. She would even tell her guests to leave at a reasonable time, so this was odd considering the fact that she wasn't even home. In fact, the bar she was at was about 4 cities away from her apartment. She wasn't even in town. "What do you mean?" she texted back. "I'm not home." Her phone buzzed again before she even had time to fully put it away in her pocket. "I can hear you up there and whoever else is with you. Please, it is very late and I'm trying to sleep." A tension balled in her stomach as she read the message. The certainty in his words sent a shiver down her spine. She'd locked up, hadn't she? At this point, she slipped away from her friend group, all dancing, drinking, and partying, and headed outside. The task at hand was to call her neighbor. Hopefully, she wouldn't come across as totally delirious. Just for a little while at least, she had to mask her subtle drunkenness. He answered the phone within seconds of her dialing. "Hey," she said. "Could you please quiet down?" he said, obviously frustrated and exhausted. "I'm telling you, really, I'm not home," she stressed, the words coming out more defensive than intended. "Okay, then who is? Because clearly someone is stomping around up there." She wondered for a moment if she had forgotten a guest, a sinking feeling anchoring in her gut. No, that couldn't be. She was always so vigilant. "No, seriously, I left earlier today and will be back tomorrow. I can completely assure you that the apartment is empty." She could tell he didn't believe her. "Here," she said, "just FaceTime me for a second." "Fine," he replied. He joined the FaceTime call and she showed him her surroundings. She gave him a look that said, "See?" But he was probably in bed as it was too dark where he was to actually get a clear look at his face. "Oh," he said, his voice reflecting that he suddenly believed her. "You sure no one is up there while you're away?" "I'm sure, really, no one is there. Maybe you're hearing the apartment next door or something." "Maybe," he said. "Have a good night." "You too," she told him, her tone annoyed with his pestering. They hung up. She walked back past the smokers and let herself back into the bar. It took a second for her to find her friends again. The music was loud, the lights were flashing. Once they saw her, she saw their hands go up. She waved back enthusiastically and rejoined the group. They continued dancing and drinking the night away. Amidst the blur of motion and laughter, her mind drifted back to the neighbor's accusations and the unsettling certainty in his voice. Could there have been somebody in her apartment? Hours later, they all fell sloppily into their hotel room. In a drunken pile, they slept until they had to check out of the hotel the following morning. After a complimentary breakfast at the hotel, they hit the road. She was the last one to be dropped off. With each block closer to her apartment, the unease grew, nagging at her. Was somebody really in her home last night? Her chauffeur of a best friend pulled up to her apartment, ensuring that they would again sometime and have nights out more frequently. They said their goodbyes and her friend drove away as her key opened the main doors. Next, she let herself into her apartment on the 4th floor, good old 412. But as she entered, she walked into such a disaster and disarray that she stepped back outside to make sure that she had entered the correct apartment. There on the door in gold lettering was the numbers 412. Yup, she was home. Her heart lodged itself in her throat, the pounding so loud it drowned out the silence of the hallway. She flicked the light on and carefully explored her now unfamiliar surroundings. It was as if a cyclone had swept through her place, upending everything. Dishes and cups had fallen to the floor, smashed, raining shards of glass all over. 2 knives stuck into the wall right beside where her family portrait hung, which looked like it had been scribbled over with Sharpie. Blankets and pillows in the living area had an assortment of goo on them that she was afraid to touch, but she noticed it gave off a metallic smell. She explored further, eyes bulging and muscles tense. In the bathroom, the sink was plugged with a pair of her socks and filled with water. She found 3 more pairs of socks in the toilet and 2 in her garage. In her bedroom, the final area she had to search, more of that weird goo was littered upon her bed, some of it dripping onto the floor and becoming crusty in the carpet. This was more than a burglary. It had to be personal. Her socks and underwear drawer had obviously been rifled through. In a panic, she called her downstairs neighbor again. "Hello?" he answered. "What did you hear last night? What did it sound like? Someone has been in my apartment." There was a pause of silence before he spoke again. "Huh?" he asked. "Last night, when you said there were noises coming from my apartment." Again, a pause. Then he spoke. "I didn't hear anything last night. Sorry to be unable to help, but I've been on vacation for the past week. I don't get back till Thursday, so I really can't help you out here." Frozen for a second, all she could think to say was, "Sorry," as she ran her hand through her hair. She now felt disoriented in a way that no amount of alcohol ever made her feel. "No," she insisted, her voice firm. "You definitely called me last night about the noise." But from the other end, her neighbor responded with an even firmer denial. "I'm certain I did not." Intent on proving her point to him and herself, she checked her call log, only to find, to her astonishment, that there had been no call at any time the night before.